Professor Valeriy Bebyk film released by film studio Civilization Incognita for Kyiv TV channel and parliamentary TV channel Rada. Heracles, a person and myth. Greetings, dear ladies and gentlemen. Herodotus claimed that Zeus' son Heracles and snake-legged goddess akin to nymph Calypso are Tithian's great parents. We are in the lands of Cimmerian Bosporus, where, according to myth, a glorious hero Heracles was born. After his death, he was taken by the god and ascended to heaven. This ascension will be then repeated by Buddha and Jesus Christ. Heracles is the most popular hero of Hellenistic myths of the classical antiquity. The etymological origin of the antiquity could be traced from the Ants tribe who used to live around modern-time Kyiv, Chernihiv, Polissya regions and northern part of the Black Sea region. This gave the ground for the historians to claim that the union of the Ants clans became the basis of the creation of the present-day Ukrainian nation. Roman historians mention the Ants starting from the 1st century AD, but it's worth mentioning that Romania, more commonly known as Byzantine, was created only in the 395 AD, while the Ants used to live around long before the foundation of Romania, that was the real first Rome. Classical antiquity lasted for approximately 1,200 years, from the 7th century BC to the 6th century AD. The Hellenistic period of the classical antiquity lasted for approximately 500 years, from the 4th century BC to the 1st century AD.
The spiritual life of the classical antiquity was characterized by the polytheism, the existence of calculus, development of philosophy, public administration and law, history, music, theater, dramaturgy and art.
According to Hellenistic myth, Heracles, who is supposed to be the great-grandfather of the Tithians and the Dorians, the Spartans, was born from the mortal woman Alcmene, and god of all gods, Zeus, was his father. Thus, he is not a god himself but a hero, since he was born by a mortal woman. It looks like back then there still was a matriarchy, since if it was otherwise, Heracles would be proclaimed a god, since his father was Zeus himself. Zeus, according to Ukrainian scientists Valentin Danilenko and Mykola Chernihiv, was of Gepilian origin. His prototype could be the king of Hellenistic city Tyrrhenes, who was probably living there from 1400 to 1100 BC. A so-called historical tradition locates the city inside Greece, but we have groundings to claim that Heracles was the king of Tyras, that is a modern Vyhorod-Dnistrovsky city in Odessa region of Ukraine. This city was manufacturing coins with Heracles' head, the river god Tyras and Demeter on their obverse and Taurus or horse head on their reverse. Back then, there was no written literature in history. That is why we are operating with information from myth. Therefore, Hellenistic myths tell us about Heracles' great force and heroic character. The Olympic Games were organized to honor him. He had 3 wives, 2 mortals, Megara and Deianira, and 1 immortal, the goddess of Yath, Hebe. He completed most of his 12 labors within the territory of Polissya and so-called Ukrainian Asia Minor, the Troada.
He really completed some of his labors here at Scythia territory. It was about obtaining the cattle of Jera. He was chasing the cattle here.
The myth of Heracles obtaining the cattle of Chiron, bulls or cows, has an interesting information regarding the origin of Thessians. Heracles was the great-grandfather of Thessians, and the snake-leg goddess was their great-grandmother. We can see the picture of the snake-leg goddess on the Tripolian ceramics, dating back to the 4th-3rd millennium BC. The same picture we saw in the collection of the Kerch Historical Culture Reserve during our shooting. And the funniest thing here is that Heracles' body was born in Ukrainian Crimea, and snake-leg goddess was living in the cage that is located at Polissya Island in Zaporizhzhia city.
It was the place where Heracles met a fantastic creature, half woman, half snake. Greeks called his monster Echidna. Herodotus mentioned that she was a goddess, a daughter of the Borisphans river. She promised Heracles to give him back the cows and horses if he would marry her.
Pay your attention, the snake-leg goddess is the daughter of the Borysthenes. The Borysthenes is the ancient name of Dnipro river. So the information from Hellenistic myth about Heracles clearly proves that Crimea was always part of the ancient Ukraine. More to that, the name of the Heracles' son Hellas, ancient Greek Hellas or Hellas, corresponds to the name of Helea, an ancient state located in central Ukraine in the Dnipro river basin. Thessian king Hellas had the title of Achilles Pontarchs, meaning the Lord of the Black Sea, that was called the Pontus Euxinus. The analysis of the Hellenistic myths about Heracles' labors shows that the most of them were happening not in Greece, but on the territory of the present-day Ukraine. For instance, the third labor, the hunt for the Tyrrhenian Hind, Heracles is hunting for the Hyborians in the lands of goddess Artemis. The cult of Apollo and Artemis originated from the Ukrainian Crimea. For instance, it was widely spread in Panticapaeum, nowadays Kerch. Or take the fourth labor, the Heracles fight against centaurs, when some of them actually supported him. So who are these centaurs? Myths portray them as half people, half horses. Fiction, you would say. Not at all. Centaurs are the tauri, riding horses. Can is a horse in the ancient Greek. The Scythian Tauri fox gave the name to the southern Ukraine, Taurida, that always included Crimean Peninsula. By the way, Centaur Chiron was Heracles' teacher, who taught him grammar, mathematics, philosophy, how to ride horses and shoot a bow. Chiron made a sky globe for Iason and the Argonauts. Maybe that is why Zeus settled him to the skies and created a centaur or Sagittarius constellation. The ninth labor was telling us about Heracles' trip to the land of Amazons. It is known as Amazons lived around Azov Sea that washes the eastern part of Ukrainian Taurida. Heracles' 11th labor was about stealing 3 of the golden apples of the Hesperides, and it's also connected to Ukrainian land. During this labor, Heracles cheated Atlas, who was doomed by Zeus to hold up the heavens on his shoulders. If we add up the information that Zeus, after his victory, made all titans to serve a sentence in Taurida, then it is 100 chance that this labor was happening in the south of ancient Ukraine. In this respect, we can see another interpretation for Panticapaeum's name. The word Pont means sea, and Kappa means gardens. Thus, Panticapaeum is gardens of the sea, where probably the golden apples were growing.
В цьому зв'язку і назва міста Пантікапеї набуває іншого прочитання. Слово «понт» означає море, а «капа» – сади. Отже, Пантикапей – це сади на морі, де, ймовірно, і росли ті золоті яблука.
These are the Dorian colonies located in the south and east Ukrainian Panticapaeum. In the Middle Ages, there was a principality of Theodoro inside Crimean Peninsula that included that name of Thessian Dorians that in the 2nd millennium BC conquered Greece and turned it to Hellas. Heracles' cult became popular around this time. And we have all grounds to state that in his name we see the name of the much older Hera or goddess that would later on transform into Ukrainian caregiving goddess Oranta. The main Ukrainian gods during the Hellenistic period were the god Or and his wife Oranta. These were the solar cults, pretty obvious for agricultural civilizations of the 5th-2nd millennium BC. It is impossible to grow crops without sunshine and water. The multiple pre-Ukrainian tribes called these gods differently: Or, Hor, Horse, Horiv. In the 2nd millennium BC, the Dorian tribes had entered historic field to make their valuable input on the development of the civilization of the Black Sea, Hellas, and to the foundation of its colonies in the Mediterranean.
The Dorians who founded Chersonese believed that they had originated from Heracles. Thus, Heracles' cult was one of the most popular in Chersonese. It is connected with the Dorians' invasion. The archaeological evidences show that in the 2nd millennium before Greece, Greece was conquered by the invasion of some tribes that came from the north. To the north from Greece means it was our territory, it was our land where this invasion had started. They were known as the Leleks, the Pelasgians, and so on and so forth.
Let's note for ourselves the words of the famous Ukrainian archaeologist Serhiy Ochotnikov, who was digging Achilles' temple at Snake Island near Odessa. The leader of Odessa Historical Fellowship states that in the 2nd millennium BC, the Lelegs, the Pelasgians and the Dorians took Greece under their control and turned it into the second Hellas. In this regard, we should recall Zinaida Rogozina, the famous expert in Russian Empire history, who herself lived in the beginning of the 20th century. She made a clear civilizational analysis of the chain from the Pelasgians to the Hellenes.
We have learned from the Romans to call the Hellenes as the Greeks. They actually originate from the most ancient root, the Pelasgians.
So the Lelegs and Pelasgians and the Dorians who did their expansion to the Mediterranean Sea and turned Greece into the Hellas in the 2nd millennium BC actually came from Ukraine. According to the Brockhaus Encyclopedia of 1893, the Dorians had conquered continental Greece, and central part of which was called Riensis, although they took control of the roads, Kos and, attention, Carpathos Islands. It is funny coincidence to find a Carpathian island in the Mediterranean. And what would you say about the Orion name of the king of Sparta, Orest, that originated from Ukrainian Crimea? Sophocles, the ancient Greek chieftain and playwright, he was Herodotus' friend, by the way, wrote a tragedy that had a simple and elegant name, Orestes.
The ancient tradition usually describes the Dorian invasion or the return of the Heraclidae, but we cannot find one single author who gives us a complete and clear story on the matter. We find only the short mentions of the Dorians led by the Heraclidae who came to the Peloponnese.
The situation is pretty clear. All the events were happening 500-700 years before there were any of these first writers or historians like Homer, Herodotus or Strabo. So that information could only be stored in the oral tradition. But for us, that information is of strategic importance. If Heracles lived approximately in 1400-1100 years AD, these descendants couldn't appear in 600-900 years after his death. Thus, the Scythians, who were Heracles' grandchildren, should be 600-900 years older than German historians claim they are. More to that, we should recall a Roman historian of the 1st century AD, Gnaeus Pompeius Trogus, who wrote, "The Scythian tribe used to be the elder one, even though there was a long-lasting fight between the Egyptians and the Scythians, who was the oldest among the two. Thus, if the Scythians were older than the Egyptians, who used to live in the 3rd millennium BC, the Scythian history should be prolonged for at least 2000 years in the past of the world history. Consequently, Heracles should be the Scythian, not the Greek hero hero.
The Scythians were mostly living inside the steppe part of the Crimea, while the seashore was not of their interest. Moreover, they actually benefited from the Greeks who were settling around. The Scythians were selling them horses, slaves, while the Greeks were selling fabric, jewelry and armor to the Scythians.
Драгоценные ткани, вина, украшения, оружие – это был взаимовыгодный торговый обмен.
The German concept of the world history created the myth of the Greek Hellas and made the world believe in the Greek colonization of Black Sea region. In the meantime, the historians of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation in the 16th-17th century AD made a statement that the Scythians entered the historical process only in the first millennium BC.
З'явилися на історичній арені лише всередині першого тисячоліття до нашої ери.
At first, when people had started to move here from Miletus, there was no local Scythian population. The Scythians started to come here in the second part of the 6th century before Christ.
Починають з'являтися в цьому районі десь о другій половині 6 століття до нової ери.
Aren't you surprised by the nomadic Scythians and their hostile meeting of the so-called Hellenistic colonization coming from the Asia Minor, Caria and Greece, Dorincis? Olena Petrova, who was Crimean, wrote that the Greeks had too little human and military force to compete with the Scythian troops if the owners would reject their arrival. Looks like a pretty strange attitude for the colonists and invaders, isn't it? But if we consider their culture and ethnic relation, we would see the right picture. It could be the return of the Dorian tribes after their few hundred years stay in the Mediterranean. Thus, it looked like the relatives who had returned from the far lands saw them be. In support of this view, there was Herodotus, called in Persian King Darius. Greeks of the Asia Minor and the Black Sea region are the one folk.
Мовляв, і ті, й інші один народ.
Researching the civilizational relationship of Ukrainian and Greek Hellenes, we should think through the rapid expansion of the Scythians, Aryans, or the Spartans, Dorians from Ukrainian Black Sea region to the Greek invaded after the Lyliks and the Pelasgians Mediterranean. In our view, such a hasty move of the Scythians, Aryans to Greece in the 12th century BC could be explained by the Greek destruction of a city of Troy in Asia Minor that was originally founded by the Teucer tribes in the 13th century BC. Starting from the end of the first millennium by the first third of the second millennium BC, the Scythians Dorians used to have a confederation of the quite powerful states Troada, Asia Minor, Mycenae, Crete Island, Sumer, Mesopotamia, Egyptian Kemet, Africa. But approximately in the 13th century BC, Palestina, that used to be populated by the Lyliks, the Pelasgians, was steadily conquered by Themites, the Arabs and the Jews. Troy was conquered by the Greeks, who previously invaded the Mediterranean islands. What would be the adequate reaction of Scythian Tripolian Teucran Empire? It was a military force. So the military response to the Greeks who destroyed the Troada was the Scythian Aryan or Dorian Spartan expansion to Greece.
Таким чином, ситуація із дорійсько-спартанською експансією в Грецію виглядає як військова відповідь скіфо-арійської спільноти на знищення греками Троади.
How did Ukrainian ancestors, the Scythians, the grandchildren of Heracles, look like? Heracles, who according to the history's father Herodotus, was the son of Hellenistic god Zeus. Heracles was the son of the king of the gods Zeus, who is in his turn, according to Ukrainian scientists Valentin Danilenko and Mykola Chmikhov, had a Tripolian origin. The real descendants of Ukrainian Tripolian civilization that was blossoming in the 5th, 2nd millennium BC were the Lyliks and the Pelasgians, who conquered the Balkan Peninsula and the islands of the present-time Greece.
Які в другому тисячолітті до нашої ери завоювали Балканський півострів і острови сучасної Греції.
We know about the outfit of the Scythians primarily from the unique beauty of pieces of art that were found in the king's tomb near Kerch, Old Pantikapaeum.
It is quite possible that it was glorious Heracles' tomb near Kerch. He was a grandfather of Thessians and the Dorian Spartans. Both of these folks were the ancestors of the present-day Ukrainians. By the way, inside the Kerch Historical Culture Reserve, we have found Heracles' statue on the tomb that couldn't be just a coincidence. The same goes for the names of the tribes, the Dorians and the Aryans, the relativity of the religious cults of Heracles, Apollo and Artemis, the concurrence of the gods Pan, the kings Orestes, and geographical Doriensis, Caria, Carpathians names, the similarity of the armor. Even Sparta is of no doubt a Thessian name. Consequently, Ukrainian Hellas, the Black and Azov Sea region, was a minor civilization origin of Greek Hellas, and Heracles was a Ukrainian hero.
А Геракл героєм України.
The Thessian great-grandfather Heracles was born in Ukrainian Crimea. Apollo and Artemis religious cults originate from the Black Sea region. The hero of the so-called Greek mythology was Achilles, who was buried together with his wife Helena at Snake Island near Odessa. This all supports the archaeological and historical evidence that the real Hellas is Ukraine.